All right, hello everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a fascinating paradox, a real head-scratcher that sits right at the heart of our modern world. How can people who are rivals also be completely dependent on each other? And trust me, this isn't some dusty old theory. It shapes everything, from the apps on your phone to the very ground we stand on. So here's the big question we're wrestling with today. How on earth can bitter rivals also be completely dependent on each other? It sounds impossible, doesn't it? A total contradiction. But stick with me because we're about to see how this very tension is one of the key things that defines the world we live in right now. Now, for all of you getting ready for the AMSC Baccalaureate, this is a super important topic. We are planted firmly in Theme 3, Relation au monde, our relationship with the world. And we're zeroing in on X2, which is all about rivalries et interdependencies, rivalries and interdependencies. Nailing this concept is absolutely crucial for understanding, well, pretty much everything about global politics, economics, and culture today. Okay, so to make sure we stay on track, this is going to be our guiding question for this whole session. How do rivalries and interdependencies shape our contemporary world, from digital code to physical territory? Think of it as our North Star as we dig into the material. So, here's the game plan. First up, we'll explore this paradox in the digital world. Then we'll jump into the physical world. Think resources, land, that kind of thing. After that, we'll bring it right down to how these huge forces affect everyday life. And to wrap it all up, I'll give you a solid toolkit for your AMC analysis. Sound good? Let's get started. All right, first stop, the digital realm. We're talking about the world of tech, code, and information. And what's wild is that it's a huge battleground, but it's also a place where ideas get, well, borrowed or even completely absorbed by the other side.
To really get a handle on the digital world, you have to go back to the beginning, to what's called the hacker ethos. At its core, this was a culture of pure rivalry. These guys were all about challenging the big guys, pushing back against corporate control, and fighting for free, open access to technology. In a way, they were the original rebels of the internet.
And boom, here is our paradox in action. On one side, you've got the rebellion. On the other, you have what we call co-optation, when the system basically swallows the rebellion whole. The very corporations the hackers were fighting against now use their language as a marketing tool. And the best example? You can't make this up. Facebook's main address is literally one hacker way. A culture built on rivalry got sucked right into the mainstream, creating this really weird interdependence. This whole idea connects directly to activism today, especially online. Digital tools are amazing for getting a message out fast. But there's a catch. One scholar, Zeynep Tufekci, calls it the fantasy of participation. It's that feeling you get when you like a post or sign an online petition. It feels like you're doing something important, right? But it often lacks the tough person-to-person organizing that powered huge historical movements like the civil rights movement. So yeah, we're dependent on these tools, but it's tricky. Okay, so we've seen how this works in the digital space. Now let's switch gears and look at the physical world. We're talking about actual land, resources, and infrastructure. And here, you can literally see the conflicts and connections carved right into the landscape. Just look at this number, 2.6 gigawatts. That is a huge amount of power. It's how much renewable energy Google buys, making it the biggest corporate buyer in the world. Now, this isn't just a PR stunt to look green. No, what this tells us is that there is a fierce, behind-the-scenes rivalry raging between tech giants for physical stuff, for energy, for water to cool their data centers, for land. Their entire digital empire is completely dependent on controlling these physical assets. And this fight for physical space isn't just a battle between giant corporations. It gets very real, very personal, and it shapes entire communities in some of the most contested places on Earth. What you're looking at here is a view of an Israeli settlement. So we're shifting our focus now from that global scale down to a very specific human-level conflict over territory and resources. So the question is, how is control actually managed in a place like this? Well, the French philosopher Michel Foucault has a really useful concept for this. He calls it a dispositif. It's basically a whole system of different things working together: laws, institutions, and most importantly, infrastructure. In the West Bank, this dispositif is made up of bypass roads connecting settlers to Israel, security barriers, and checkpoints. And this is where the paradox just becomes so clear. All this infrastructure creates connection and safety for one group, while at the exact same time, it creates separation and isolation for another. They are two sides of the same interdependent but totally unequal system. This brings us to our last big idea, and it's a bit more subtle. It's about how these really intense political conflicts can start to feel, well, normal.
How do they just blend into the background of everyday life? So much so that the people living inside them might not even see it as political anymore.
The key word we need to understand here is depoliticization. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is pretty simple. It's the process of taking something that is deeply political and controversial and stripping away the politics. You make it seem natural, normal, or just a simple matter of someone's quality of life. And here is a perfect example of how that works on the ground. A researcher, Jakub Zahora, actually asked settlers about their motivations for moving. And you know what? Most didn't talk about politics or ideology. They talked about things you or I might look for in a new house. A better climate, spatiality in the view, or just wanting a bigger home for their family. A profoundly political act gets experienced as a personal, apolitical lifestyle choice. That is depoliticization in action.
And you can literally see what this process looks like. I mean, look at these pictures. On the one hand, you have these suburban-style homes. They could be almost anywhere in the world, right? On the other, a totally normal-looking shopping center. This creation of a familiar, suburban normality is a powerful tool. It works to erase the complex and contested political landscape that exists just outside the frame.
Now, if we want to get really sophisticated in our analysis, and we do, we can use an idea from another philosopher, Jacques Rancière. He talks about the distribution of the sensible. It sounds complicated, but it's really about the invisible rules that decide what we see and what we don't, what we hear as important speech and what we dismiss as just noise. Power, in this sense, works by controlling our very perception, defining the boundaries of what is even considered political in the first place.
Okay, that was a lot of heavy theory, I know. So let's bring it back down to earth. How do you actually use all this stuff to build a fantastic analysis for the back? Let's build your AMC toolkit.
Whenever you're analyzing a document, I want you to remember 3 letters. PEE. Point, example, explanation. It is your absolute best friend. First, make your point. State your argument, loud and clear. Something like, corporate culture often co-opts rebellious movements. Then, back it up with a concrete example from the text, like, Facebook's address is at one hacker way. Finally, and this is the most important part, explain how that example proves your point. Connect the dots. This structure will make your argument so clear and convincing.
And here's your vocabulary booster pack for today. These are the key terms we've been using. But listen, don't just memorize them. You have to understand them. When you can correctly use a word like cooptation or dispositif in your own analysis with a precise example to back it up, trust me, it's going to make your work stand out.
So let's bring everything together and wrap this up. We've seen how this paradox of rivalry and interdependence isn't just a theory, but a reality that shapes our world in very concrete ways. This table basically puts our whole discussion in a nutshell. In the digital realm, you've got the rivalry of hacking, but it's tied to the interdependence of corporate co-optation. In the physical world, the competition for land is intertwined with the reality of shared infrastructures. And in our everyday lives, political conflict is managed through the interdependent process of depoliticization. The main thing to get is that you can't have one without the other. The rivalry and the interdependence, they're always two sides of the same coin.
And that brings us right back to our guiding question. We've seen how these forces of rivalry and interdependence are constantly at play, from a hacker's code to a suburban view, which leaves us with one final, crucial question to think about, one that goes way beyond the classroom. In a world defined by these complex, often invisible connections, what does it truly mean to be a responsible, aware citizen?